Swords and Spells. Part 3. The Heart of Darkness. Blake and Luna stood before the towering fortress, its dark, twisted spires reaching into the sky like claws grasping for the heavens. The air around them was thick with an unnatural cold, and the very ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with a malevolent energy. It was as if the fortress itself was alive, breathing in the fear of those who dared to approach it. Blake tightened his grip on his sword, feeling the familiar weight in his hand. It was a reminder that he wasn't powerless, that despite the overwhelming magic that surrounded him, he had his own strength. Beside him, Luna's eyes glowed faintly with the soft blue light of her magic. She could sense the dark force within the fortress, a swirling mass of "We're close," Luna whispered, her voice barely audible over the low, ominous rumble that seemed to emanate from the fortress itself. "I can feel it, the dark force. It's stronger here than anywhere else. We need to be careful." Blake nodded, his expression resolute. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. We've come too far to turn back now." As they approached the massive gates of the fortress, they found them surprisingly unguarded. The dark force, it seemed, had grown so powerful that it no longer feared any would-be challengers. With a nod from Blake, Luna raised her hand, and the gates groaned open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched far into the shadows. The two stepped inside, and the gates slammed shut behind them with a thunderous boom. They were plunged into near darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of Luna's magic and the cold gleam of Blake's sword. The air inside the fortress was heavy, almost suffocating, and the walls seemed to close in on them as they moved deeper into the heart of the darkness. They walked in silence, every step echoing in the oppressive gloom. The corridor twisted and turned, leading them deeper and deeper into the fortress. As they went, they began to see signs of the dark force's influence, cracked walls seeping with dark energy, once grand tapestries now tattered and decayed, and statues of ancient heroes twisted into grotesque forms. Finally, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. At its center stood a figure cloaked in shadows, its presence overwhelming and terrifying. The dark force had taken a physical form, a swirling mass of black energy with glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness and into their very souls. "So, you've come," the dark force hissed, its voice a cold whisper that seemed to echo from all around them. "Two foolish mortals who think they can challenge me. You should have stayed in the light where you belong." Blake stepped forward, his sword raised defiantly. "We're not here to run or hide. We're here to end this. You've taken enough from this world." The dark force laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the chamber. "End this? You? A mere mortal with no magic? You cannot hope to stand against me." Blake's grip tightened on his sword, but he felt no fear. He had spent his entire life being told what he couldn't do, and yet here he was, standing before the greatest threat Valoria had ever known. He glanced at Luna, who nodded at him, her eyes full of determination. "You may have power," Blake said, his voice steady, "but power isn't everything. It's heart, courage, and the will to fight for what's right that make us strong. And that's something you'll never understand." With that, Blake charged forward, his sword gleaming in the dim light. The dark force lashed out with tendrils of black energy, trying to ensnare him, but Blake was faster. He dodged and weaved, his movements fluid and precise, the result of years of relentless training. He closed the distance between them, his sword slicing through the air with deadly accuracy. Luna wasn't far behind. She unleashed a torrent of spells, her magic a brilliant contrast to the darkness that surrounded them. Fire, ice, and lightning crackled from her fingertips, striking the dark force with blinding intensity. But for every blow they landed, the dark force retaliated with equal ferocity, its power seemingly endless. The battle raged on, the chamber filled with the sounds of clashing magic and steel. Blake and Luna fought with everything they had, but the dark force was relentless. It seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment, feeding off the magic in the air and the fear that it could sense in its opponents. Blake could feel himself tiring, his muscles aching from the strain of the fight, but he couldn't afford to slow down. Not now. Not when they were so close. He glanced at Luna, who was breathing heavily, her face pale with exhaustion. They had to end this, and soon. As if sensing their desperation, the dark force unleashed a massive wave of energy, forcing them both to the ground. Blake's sword clattered out of his hand, and he struggled to get back up, his body screaming in protest. The dark force loomed over them, its eyes glowing with malevolent glee. "Is this the best you can do?" it sneered. "How pitiful. You are nothing compared to me." Blake gritted his teeth, refusing to give in to despair. He reached out for his sword, but it was just out of reach. The dark force began to gather its energy for a final, devastating attack, one that would surely end them both. But in that moment, something stirred within Blake. A deep, unyielding resolve that had been forged in the fires of countless battles, in the face of every doubt and every sneer. He wasn't just a swordsman. He was Blake, the one who had defied the odds, who had refused to be broken by a world that said he wasn't enough. And he wasn't alone. Luna was with him, his friend, his partner, the one who had believed in him when no one else did. Together, they were stronger than any magic, stronger than any darkness. With a roar of determination, Blake pushed himself to his feet. He didn't need his sword. His strength came from within, from his heart and his will. He charged at the dark force, his fists clenched, ready to strike with everything he had. Luna, seeing Blake's determination, felt a surge of energy within herself. She gathered the last of her strength, channeling her magic into a single, powerful spell. A brilliant light began to emanate from her, growing brighter and brighter until it filled the entire chamber. The dark force recoiled, its form beginning to waver under the intensity of the light. Blake reached it in that moment, his fist connecting with the heart of the darkness with all the force of his will. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber, and the dark force let out a scream of pure rage and pain. Luna's spell reached its peak, and with a final, blinding flash, the dark force was consumed by the light. The chamber shook violently, and for a moment, it seemed as if the entire fortress would collapse around them. But then, the darkness began to fade, the malevolent energy dissipating into nothingness. When the light finally dimmed, Blake and Luna stood alone in the chamber, the dark force vanquished. The oppressive weight that had filled the air was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and peace. Blake let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding and turned to Luna. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Luna smiled, though she looked as exhausted as he felt. "We did," she agreed, her voice soft but filled with pride. They made their way out of the fortress, their steps slow and unsteady. The outside world greeted them with a brilliant sunrise, the sky painted in hues of gold and pink. The land, once drained of its magic, seemed to come alive again, the trees and flowers beginning to bloom as the dark force's influence faded. As they stood at the edge of the fortress, looking out over the land they had saved, Blake felt a sense of fulfillment that he had never known before. He had proven to himself, and to the world, that true strength wasn't about what you were born with, but about what you chose to become. Luna placed a hand on his shoulder, her smile warm and genuine. "You've always been strong, Blake, but now, everyone else will see it too." Blake looked at her, feeling a deep gratitude for the friend who had stood by him through it all. "And I couldn't have done it without you, Luna." Together, they walked away from the fortress, leaving the darkness behind. Their journey wasn't over, but they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger than ever before. The end of part 3.